My name is Callie Monroe, and I've been carrying my brother's death like a stone in my chest for 6 years. Some grief never leaves you. It just learns to sleep, waiting for the right moment to wake up and remind you that some questions will never have answers. Nate died in a fire at a spiritual retreat in the Oregon mountains. That's what the official report said, anyway. Accidental death, probable cause electrical malfunction. Case closed. But I never believed it, not really. My brother was careful, methodical, the kind of person who checked smoke detectors twice and never left candles burning. The retreat was called Transcendence Path, run by a man named Raphael Mears who claimed to help people connect with their higher selves through meditation and plant medicine ceremonies. Nate had been searching for something after his divorce, some kind of spiritual awakening that would help him make sense of his life. I was against it from the start. Something about Raphael felt wrong when Nate showed me his website. Too smooth, too polished, like he was selling enlightenment instead of offering it. But Nate was determined, and I'd learned not to argue with him when he got that look in his eyes. The fire happened on the third night of the retreat. According to the other participants, they'd been in the main lodge for a ceremony when the flames started in the cabin where Nate was staying. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. They found his body in the bedroom, overcome by smoke inhalation. I drove to Oregon the next day, but the scene was already cleared. The cabin was nothing but ash and charred foundation stones. Raphael had left immediately after giving his statement to the police, claiming he was too traumatized to continue running the retreat. I never got to speak with him directly. The investigation was perfunctory. A rural fire department with limited resources, no obvious signs of foul play, and a victim who'd been participating in what some people considered fringe spiritual practices. The insurance company paid out, the case was filed away, and everyone moved on except me. I threw myself into my work as a therapist, helping other people process their trauma while ignoring my own. I told myself I was fine, that I'd accepted what happened, that grief was just something you learn to live with. But the sleepless nights told a different story. 6 years later, I was barely functioning. 3 hours of sleep a night, anxiety that felt like electricity running through my veins, and a growing sense that I was losing my grip on reality. My supervisor at the clinic noticed, my friends noticed, even my clients seemed to sense that something was wrong. That's when I decided to try lucid dreaming. I'd read about it in graduate school, the idea that you could train your mind to become conscious within dreams, to control and direct the narrative of your sleeping mind. Some therapists used it to help clients process trauma, to revisit painful memories in a safe space where they had agency. I started with the basics. Reality checks throughout the day, asking myself if I was dreaming every time I looked at my hands. Dream journals by my bedside, documenting every fragment I could remember. Meditation before sleep, focusing on the intention to become aware within my dreams. The first successful lucid dream happened on a Tuesday night in November. I was walking through my childhood home, but the walls were painted colors I'd never seen before. When I realized I was dreaming, the sensation was incredible. Pure awareness flooding through an impossible space. I experimented with small changes at first. Made the furniture rearrange itself, changed the weather outside the windows, summoned objects from memory. It felt like having superpowers, complete control over a reality that existed only in my mind. The second lucid dream was more ambitious. I created a beach that stretched to infinity, with waves that sang in harmonies I could never have imagined while awake. I flew above the water, feeling the salt spray on my face, completely present in a world that existed nowhere but in my sleeping consciousness. But the third dream changed everything. I was in a forest that felt familiar but wrong, trees that grew in spirals and paths that led in impossible directions. I was enjoying the surreal landscape when I heard someone calling my name. I turned around and saw him. Nate, standing 30 feet away, looking exactly as he had the last time I saw him alive. Same brown hair that never stayed combed, same crooked smile that made people trust him immediately. But something was different about his eyes. They held an urgency I'd never seen before. "Callie," he said, his voice carrying perfectly through the dream air. "I've been trying to reach you." I tried to run toward him, but my feet wouldn't move. Dream logic held me in place while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Nate? Is this real?" "As real as anything else," he said. "Listen to me. There's not much time." He began walking toward me, and I could see details that my conscious mind couldn't have invented. A small scar on his forehead from when he'd fallen off his bike as a kid. The way his left eyebrow was slightly higher than his right. The particular shade of green in his eyes that I'd inherited from our mother. "You have to look for Raphael," he said. "He's still out there. Still doing the same thing to other people." Before I could ask what he meant, the dream began to dissolve. I felt myself being pulled back toward consciousness, Nate's figure becoming transparent and distant. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, his voice still echoing in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just my subconscious processing unresolved grief. Of course I would dream about Nate. Of course my mind would create scenarios where he could give me the answers I'd been searching for. It was psychological wish fulfillment, nothing more. But the dream had felt different from any I'd experienced before. More vivid, more emotionally resonant, more real than reality itself. And the way Nate had looked at me, with such desperate urgency, made it impossible to dismiss as simple fantasy. I started researching Raphael Mears more thoroughly than I had 6 years ago. Back then, I'd been too destroyed by grief to think clearly. Now, I approached it with the systematic thoroughness I used in my professional work. The Transcendence Path website was long gone, but internet archives preserved fragments of what it had been. Photos of the retreat center, testimonials from participants, descriptions of ceremonies that sounded increasingly concerning the more I read about them. I found a few mentions of Raphael in spiritual forums, people discussing their experiences at various retreats. Most were positive, but there were a few that raised red flags. References to ceremonies that had gone too far, participants who'd been pushed beyond their limits, people who'd left feeling traumatized rather than enlightened. 3 nights after the first dream, Nate appeared again. This time I was in a replica of our childhood bedroom, complete with the posters on the walls and the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. He was sitting on his old bed, looking at me with the same urgent expression. "Did you look for him?" he asked. "I'm trying," I said. "But I don't know where to start." "Mountain View Cemetery," he said. "Look for the name Marcus Webb. He was there the night I died." I woke up and immediately wrote down the name. Marcus Webb. I'd never heard it before, but I spent the next day searching for any connection to Raphael or the retreat. I found nothing online, but something about the name felt important. Mountain View Cemetery was in Portland, about an hour's drive from where the retreat had been located. I went there on a Saturday morning, walking through rows of headstones, looking for Marcus Webb. I found him in the older section, a granite marker that read Marcus Webb, 1965 to 2018, beloved son and brother. The dates meant he died 2 years after Nate. I took a photo of the headstone and started researching Marcus Webb specifically. I found an obituary that mentioned he'd struggled with addiction and mental health issues after a traumatic experience at a spiritual retreat in Oregon. The pieces were starting to connect, but I needed more information. I reached out to the family listed in the obituary, explaining that I was researching the retreat where my brother had died. Marcus's sister, Linda, agreed to meet with me. Linda Webb was a small woman with tired eyes and the cautious manner of someone who'd been hurt too many times. We met at a coffee shop in Portland, and she told me about her brother's experience at Transcendence Path. "Marcus was never the same after that place," she said. "He came back talking about things that didn't make sense, like he'd seen something terrible. He wouldn't give me details, just said that people needed to know what Raphael was really doing. Did he ever mention my brother? Nate Monroe? Linda's expression darkened. He talked about a man who'd tried to stop Raphael from doing something dangerous. Said he'd been killed for it, but everyone thought it was an accident. My hands started shaking. Killed? Marcus was paranoid toward the end, seeing threats everywhere. But he kept saying that Raphael had burned down the cabin to cover up what had really happened. He was trying to gather evidence when he overdosed. I left the coffee shop with Linda's phone number and a promise to call if I found anything. That night, I went to bed hoping for another dream, another clue from Nate about what I should do next. He appeared in a landscape that looked like the Oregon mountains, but distorted, with trees that grew downward and a sky that rippled like water. He was more agitated than before, his form flickering in and out of focus. "You're getting close," he said. "But Raphael knows. He's been watching you." "How is that possible?" "The same way I'm talking to you now. Some things exist between sleeping and waking, between life and death. He's learned to navigate those spaces." The dream landscape began to shift and darken. I could feel something malevolent approaching, a presence that made the air feel thick and difficult to breathe. Nate grabbed my hand, and I felt a jolt of electrical connection. "Look for the recorder," he said. I hid it before the fire. Southeast corner of the foundation, 3 feet down. I woke up with my hands still tingling from where he'd touched me. The sensation lingered for hours, a reminder that what I'd experienced felt more real than any dream I'd ever had. I drove to the retreat site the next weekend, armed with a metal detector I'd borrowed from a colleague. The property had been abandoned since the fire, overgrown with blackberry vines and Douglas fir saplings. I found the remains of the cabin foundation, a rough rectangle of charred concrete and stone. The southeast corner was thick with vegetation, but I cleared it away and began scanning with the metal detector. After an hour of searching, I got a strong signal about 2 feet down. I dug carefully, and my shovel hit something hard and rectangular. It was a digital recorder, sealed in a waterproof case. The plastic was melted from the heat, but the device inside looked intact. I drove straight to an electronics repair shop, where a technician was able to extract the data from the damaged memory card. The recording was from the night Nate died. His voice, clear and urgent, documenting what he'd witnessed at the retreat. Raphael conducting a ceremony that had gone dangerously wrong, participants convulsing and speaking in languages they didn't know, one person stopping breathing before being revived. And then Raphael's voice, discovering that Nate had been recording. The sound of a struggle, threats, and finally Raphael's voice saying, "I'll burn it all down before I let you destroy what I've built here." I took the recording to the police, along with everything I'd learned about Marcus Webb and the other participants who'd suffered after attending the retreat. The detective assigned to the case was skeptical at first, but the audio evidence was compelling enough to reopen the investigation. They found Raphael living under a different name in Northern California, running another spiritual retreat center. When they arrested him, they discovered documents connecting him to other suspicious deaths at similar facilities across the country. The night after Raphael's arrest, I had one final dream. Nate appeared in a vast field at sunrise, no longer burned or desperate. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, like he had when we were kids and the world still made sense. "Now you can finally rest," he said, and I knew he was talking about both of us. I woke up crying, but for the first time in 6 years, they were tears of relief rather than grief. That night, I slept peacefully for 8 hours straight. No dreams, no nightmares, just the deep, restorative sleep I'd been missing for so long. Raphael was convicted on multiple charges, including second-degree murder in Nate's death. The trial revealed the extent of his manipulation and abuse, the way he'd used people's spiritual seeking as a cover for his own psychological experiments. Marcus Webb's death was reclassified as suspicious, and investigations were opened into other retreat centers Raphael had operated. I still practice lucid dreaming, but I've never seen Nate again. Sometimes I wonder if he was real, if consciousness can persist beyond death in ways we don't understand. Other times I think he was just my mind's way of processing information I already had access to, guiding me toward answers I was capable of finding on my own. But I know what I felt in those dreams, the electric reality of his presence, the way he looked at me with such desperate love. Whether he was my brother's spirit or my own subconscious wisdom, he saved my life and brought justice to people who deserved it. I think about him sometimes when I'm helping my clients process their own trauma. The way healing can come from the most unexpected places, how the mind has ways of protecting us even when we think we're completely lost. How love can transcend death, even if we can't always understand the mechanisms by which it operates. The stone in my chest is still there, but it's different now. Smaller, smoother, more like a memorial than a wound. I carry it as a reminder of my brother's courage, his determination to protect other people even when it cost him his life. And on quiet nights, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I sometimes whisper thank you to the darkness. For dreams that heal, for love that persists, for the strange and wonderful ways that consciousness finds to take care of itself. My name is Callie Monroe, and I learned that some mysteries can only be solved by those who are willing to believe in possibilities beyond the rational world. I learned that death is not always the end of communication, and that justice can come from the most unexpected sources. I learned that grief is not something to be cured, but something to be transformed. And I learned that sometimes the people we love most find ways to reach us, even across the vast distance between life and death, even in the space between sleeping and waking. Nate is gone, but he saved me one final time. And in saving me, he saved other people from the same fate he'd suffered. That's the kind of person he was in life, and apparently, it's the kind of person he remained in whatever comes after. I sleep peacefully now, knowing that love is stronger than death, that consciousness is more mysterious than we imagine, and that sometimes the most profound healing happens in the space between dreams and reality. The stone in my chest has become a reminder rather than a burden. A small weight that keeps me grounded, connected to the brother who loved me enough to reach across impossible distances to make sure I found the truth. And in finding the truth, I found peace. Some questions do have answers. Sometimes justice comes, even if it takes 6 years and requires believing in possibilities that challenge everything we think we know about the nature of consciousness and death. My brother died in a fire 6 years ago. But in my dreams, he lived long enough to make sure his killer was brought to justice. And that's a kind of miracle I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.